Hello and welcome to Creating a Human Rights Culture, which aims to promote a lived awareness of the interdependency and indivisibility of human rights principles in our minds, hearts, and bodies, that is, dragged into our everyday lives. What, after all, is freedom of speech to a person who is homeless and lives in a world at war? Therefore, it is dedicated ultimately to the application of the Human Rights Triptych, which in brief consists of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at its center, the conventions, that is, international treaties on the right, and implementation measures on the left. Hello everyone, I'm Joseph Wronka, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Creating a Human Rights Culture, which calls for a lived awareness of human rights principles in our minds, in our hearts, especially here, I think, and integrated into our everyday lives. I'm here today with Professors Walter Mullin and Miguel Arce, who I've worked with at Springfield College School of Social Work for roughly 2 decades. How you guys doing? Let's shake.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now we'll shake. Okay. And it's been a pleasure working with you. And we're going to listen to their research and their insights into poverty in Western Massachusetts. Information is power, of course. And I think that what we're going to hear is going to be very, very powerful. And hopefully it will move us, you guys out there listening, to guys and gals, whatever, to some kind of social action. Like I say in my classes, social action in the struggle for human dignity and human rights. Of course, they're not poor. I'm not poor. To be honest, we are tenured professors. At least now, speaking for myself, when I was in graduate school, I guess I could say I live in extreme poverty like many of you out there, but I'm okay now. And eventually we're going to have voices of people that are struggling with poverty right now. That will come at another time. People who are chronically unemployed, the homeless, those barely making it to support their families, even on 2 jobs, sacrificing medications, even for their children, just to put food on the table. We'll do that at another time. We can't do everything now, but I'm now with my 2 esteemed colleagues. So how does this relate to human rights? Let me just say a couple of things. And then I'll shut up, okay? All right? And leave it to you guys. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is consistently referred to now as customary international law, which all governments must follow, and is at the heart of the Human Rights Triptych. And let me add that the United States was the main architect of that document under the able leadership of an American, Ms. Eleanor Roosevelt, who had viewed poverty as a violation of human rights. Now, in Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it says, "Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family." Eleanor Roosevelt wanted non-sexist language. I guess women are also in poverty. Well, they certainly are, but she got nixed. Including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his or her control. Motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. Well, we'll be talking about this. After the Declaration came a document called the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. On the right side of the panel of the Human Rights Triptych, the United States has not ratified that document. There's only a handful of countries that haven't ratified it. And it basically further elaborates on rights found in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says, among other things, that we should have paid leave for working mothers before or after childbirth. believe it or not, President Trump has said that he wants to do that. Okay? We can't demonize the guy. I kind of don't like him, but you don't want to demonize him. That's what I think. But anyway, that's another story. The prohibition of economic and social exploitation of children harmful to their morals or health. Well, you know what he's doing on the border. That's it. I'm not going to talk about Trump anymore. This is your show. The right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. The reduction of infant mortality. The improvement of environmental hygiene and good quality daycare for parents wanting to work in the formalized workforce, and that's in the Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. The list goes on. So what we'll do here is have a conversation with Professor Arce, who will now talk about some data on who's poor, how poor are they, and I would say taking into consideration in part Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which speaks of non-discrimination based on race, religion, sex, political opinion, and other status. So in other words, you got to look. So let's look at sex. So are women or men more in poverty? That's sort of what it is, okay? And of course, I just want to say, and like I said, I'll shut up, but I'm going on for how long? There should be no poor to help. And we must eliminate the edifice that produces poverty in the first place, looking at alternatives to how a profit-oriented system produces poverty in the first place. It's kind of dismantling the edifice that produces beggars. Martin Luther King said that, okay? And then Dr. Mullin will speak about the lived experience of people in poverty and also looking at poverty from a strengths perspective. So, do you want to go first?
Sure.
Say anything you want to say, all right?
Well, thank you for having Dr. Mullin and I here to be part of your,
Pleasure to have you.
Thank you. I think I would like to start off with the premise that people don't want to be poor. They don't choose to be poor. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge the fact that every single human being has abilities to bounce back from life circumstances. Unfortunately, a lot of people are put in a position where they have multiple barriers in front of them. Dr. Mullin and I have written a series of guest opinions that have been published in El Sol Latino, approximately 50 or more articles or guest opinions that we've written around the continuing theme of poverty. And what we found, even prior to our beginning these guest opinion articles in an article that we wrote, is that people basically have...
And could the viewers find this on the internet? What was the name of the newspaper again?
It's called El Sol Latino. Yes, and it can be...
El Sol Latino.
That's right.
Got it, guys? Okay.
Yeah, it can be found on the internet. And it's also archived at the Holyoke Public Library. But in any case, what we found is that people in poverty can be lifted out of poverty given certain circumstances. For instance, people have to believe not only the person who's poor, but other people who are surrounding them need to believe in the possibility of them escaping poverty. So there has to be belief. There has to be support for those individuals. And right now we see that the government is abandoning poor people. Mm-hmm. And then finally, there has to be action taken. There has to be action taken by the individual or the family, and there has to be action taken by the government, right?
Of course.
So when we're talking about, we'll talk back and forth, but I guess I would offer you the first statistic.
You can pipe in now if you want any questions,
Yeah.
comments.
So the first statistic that really bothers me in my heart is that at a very conservative level, 1 in 5 children are poor.
United States or Western?
In the United States. In the United States. That's about, if you look at all the people in the United States, about 40 million people are poor. And about 40% of those 40 million people who are poor suffer from what is called extreme poverty, so that they make 50% less than the poverty rate.
By the way, if I could interject, just
Please.
yesterday the United Nations came up with a report that said 18 million people in the United States live in extreme poverty.
Well, that's
The Trump administration
that is
said
exactly
that was
the
bogus.
number.
It's 250,000.
no.
Well, that's what he said.
No, but I mean the number that you
Keep on
just
going.
gave,
Sorry to
it is consistent with what I said.
Yeah.
So, I guess what really bothers me is children who don't have the ability to escape from it. They're the most vulnerable. And also I would offer, and then I know that Dr. Mullin has a lot of statistics around this, that most of those people who suffer from poverty are working, believe it or not.
I believe it.
Yeah, and so that the wages that people are getting at minimum wage is not enough to get them out of poverty. And many of those individuals are led by women who have multiple jobs and are still not able to provide enough for their own children. I don't know if you want to pick it up.
Yes, thanks again, Nelson, from my perspective of having us here and being able to talk about this. One of the points that we make, that we want to emphasize, is that in the current political arena, the discussion about poverty seems to have disappeared. It's that people talk about the middle class and helping the middle class, but it seems that the idea of what life is like for people living in poverty seems to be lost. So when each month, when we write an opinion piece, we come at it from the perspective of hopefully raising some awareness of what we see life is like in poverty. So we work from the perspective of sort of what are the major social policies or social programs and the structure of those social programs, what they're intended to do, what they do, and then how does it work on ground level? What does it mean for the person who's living day in and day out without the resources that they need? So we come at it from that perspective. So we know, for example, if we speak kind of about the ground level, about the daily life of people with poverty, that there's a lot of strengths, first of all, in the way that people live their lives. Now, if you're living sort of a middle class or upper class life, you may not realize that there are strengths that people have in the way they live. But people in poverty also construct their own rhythms. They construct rhythms of managing problems, of how to solve problems, and so that it's another thing, another purpose of our articles, which is to highlight those strengths, both from the community level as well as in family dynamics or individual dynamics, the coping patterns. So we believe that one of the things is that we have to kind of imagine what life is like. And my particular interest is family life. I'm very interested in the idea of raising children. So if you're an adult raising children, how do you do that without resources? How do you get through the day? So it's interesting. Today on the radio, when I was on my way into work, there was a segment on rural poverty in the United States.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
And the question, it was really a wonderful question. They interviewed several people. And this is a question which I believe is very useful for our discussion, which is, if you were to today be hit with a bill of $1,000, an emergency bill of $1,000, could you pay it? Well, and I thought, $1,000, that's a lot of money. I reframed the question for myself. If you're hit with a bill of $200 today, could you pay that? So what's an example of that? An example would be that you have a car and you need tires for the car, and you have to buy tires. Well, maybe you've earned enough money to pay your rent this month and you're able to buy food this month. But you know, now all of a sudden you're going to have to come up with $200. Well, the middle class idea is, well, you can charge that, you can use your charge card, or maybe have a little cushion in the bank or something like that. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about people that have no resource beyond that. Now, you both have mentioned the extreme poor, which is really a very important thing for us in social work. But I'm also talking about the near poor, the people who can be broken so easily by a bill like this. One bill could really throw you into the deeper level poverty. And so that's an important group of people. So this is people who work. So the idea that poor people don't work is a fallacy. Poor people work, and where do they work? They work at service jobs. They work in retail. They work for home health aides.
Yeah.
They work all over the place. They work.
If I can
absolutely. They work
interject, if you have
second
a
shift.
broad concept of work, imagine all the work it takes for a homeless person to get a drink of water.
Yeah.
I mean, so this is a broader concept, but
Broader,
continue.
yeah. So we can build this. We can build this out of, say, the discussion on minimum wage, for example. So we look at that. And so the Massachusetts minimum wage is now $12 per hour. And I think is it 2021 that it's going to go up to $15. So there's legislation that will bring Massachusetts minimum wage by 2021 up to $15 an hour. So you realize that is, well, I calculated, I don't see my calculations here. At 40 hours a week, for 50 weeks, that's $24,000 a year. So $24,000 a year, living on minimum wage, working 40 hours a week for 50 weeks, 2 weeks vacation, right? There's the idea of the minimum wage and the living wage. The living wage, which is a calculation of what it costs to really live in an area, right? Mm-hmm. To really live in an area. So today we looked into that. Miguel and I looked into that for this region of Massachusetts. Anyway, we came up with a couple of numbers that if you're a single parent with 2 children, you would need something like $56,000 to raise children at a level which involves buying clothes for them, giving them some opportunities, having
birthday
food,
presents, sure.
All of that. Well, so we're talking about a minimum wage that gives you $24,000 and a living wage which could be at the low end $56,000. We saw a number that was even higher than that. But say we just play with the lowest end of the living wage and the highest end of the minimum. It's astronomical, right?
Yeah.
It's astronomical, that difference. So how do you do it? How do you do it? How do you get through the day? To me, this is crucial. This is crucial. We have to imagine this. And we can't go criticizing people for what they try to do to
Of course
live.
not.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know if you can visualize the population that we have special interest in, but if you can imagine a segregated community, and though we know that segregation is against the law, we know that de facto segregation exists. You can find large tracts in several communities in the area where it's almost exclusively Latino or almost exclusively African American. And those neighborhoods are frequently characterized by very old housing that may be multi-story housing, maybe housing that was created for Irish immigrants or Polish immigrants or Greek immigrants or Armenians or whoever.
Yeah.
And now are currently housing, 100 years later, the same darn buildings with large families for over 100 years are still housing poor people. And in these neighborhoods, since we have neighborhood schools, unfortunately, despite heroic attempts by educators, the children are receiving substandard education. Now, I'm not trying to cast dispersions on educators, because I'm not. There are some
very
really
dedicated people.
very dedicated individuals. but they have multiple problems that the children come into school with. So for instance, maybe their first meal in the day is eaten at school for breakfast.
Yes.
And most probably lunch also. And often teachers will create packages of food for the children to take home on long weekends.
If I may
Yes, sir.
intercept.
Yes, sir.
Also, I would say something like 80% of children are daydreaming about problems in their families, and it's very hard to concentrate. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights says the family is the fundamental unit of society and is entitled to protection by the state. But I don't know, there's no protection. The welfare benefits aren't
so now
good,
you're moving into more kind of like a theoretical perspective, which is we live in a capitalist society.
There you go.
And they're going to, the individuals are going to say that government should play a nominal role at best, that the families have to take personal responsibility, and if not the families, then the church. So the capitalists would tell you that the government should play the least amount have the least duty for these families. It's really up to the individual to lift themselves up. I know that you have a lot to say about that.
Well, because in capitalism, the idea that when there's wealthy people, there has to be poor people in order to, it's the survival of the fittest, right?
Yes.
So the fit survive and succeed, but in order to do that, they have to leave someone else behind because of the way the economy, the money is dispersed, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like a pyramid, it comes down to sort of beliefs that you have about people and human beings, and the idea that if you're at the top, are you there because there's people at the bottom? There's a connection between the top and the bottom. And so from our perspective as social workers, we believe in doing something about that.
And maybe make the full circle back to the Declaration of Human Rights. As social workers, one of our key values is social justice. And when there's a growing divide between those who have and those who don't have, then it's a direct kind of contradiction with our values as social workers about social justice. By the way, the idea of social justice is embedded very strongly in various religious faiths, right?
Yes.
So for instance, Pope Francis speaks about the duty of governments to step forward. And as you started at the very beginning, is that our government has not stepped up to the plate, right? Of industrialized countries, we're doing a disservice to the rest of the world if we're not being the model for what can be done for people, right? Yeah. And we're so far behind the rest of the industrialized countries. I think we have a moral obligation to poor people and especially children. I'm not talking about some surfer hippie guy that wants to just, live on, pot and alcohol and surf all day long. And if they want to do that, that's fine. I don't care. But our interest is children and families.
That's right.
And we're talking about a large sector of our society. Right. 1 in 4 Americans are poor.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We're not talking about a surfer hippie, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
By the way, I like surfer hippies. But
I'm sure you do.
Okay. So if we imagine, to follow you what you're saying, if once again, sort of taking the perspective of mentalizing, of imagining the experiences of children or families. So we know, for example, that poor people move more often than non-poor people.
Yes.
They change houses. So frequently we can understand the move of one child in the course of their school years can be dramatic. You leave friends behind, you leave teachers you leave the school building, and you move to a new place. Well, we know that sometimes because of housing problems or other neighborhood issues, people move sometimes 3 to 4 times a year. So there's an experience of a child. The idea that you go to school and you get your meals at school, means what happens on the weekends, what happens when you're not at school, what happens in the summer, what's happening to you in that way.
Yeah, food insecurity, they
food
call it. You don't know where
insecurity.
your next meal is coming
That's
from.
right, food insecurity. So, and significant.
Transportation, for example. You know, that if you're living in the neighborhood that we began to visualize, that you're the responsible adult in the household may or may not have a car. And if you do have a car, what is the reliability of that car? Can you pay for insurance? Can you pay for the gas? Things that I think most of us take for granted, right? Health access.
Can I jump in?
Yes,
for the
please.
I can give you my example of that. So at
Go
one
ahead.
point when I was working at a hospital, and so people would make appointments and come for, it was an outpatient mental health clinic. And so there was a policy at one point at this clinic where you couldn't be seen for a medication appointment and a counseling appointment on the same day. So for some insurance
Wow.
reasons, there was that policy because insurance companies didn't want to pay for it. So what it means is you once again visualizing, to get to this clinic, if you came on the bus, it would take you from parts of Springfield, sometimes an hour and a half to 2 hours, to both get there and come home for your appointments. And so you'd come. So to drive there from where I'm imagining would take 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes in your car. So we're talking about parents, once again, needing an appointment, taking 2 hours to get to it. If they had a car, they'd hop in the car and be there. So, and then in order to get a medicine appointment and a counseling appointment, you couldn't do it on the same day. So this is an example of sort of the lack of understanding of what life is like in poverty, to be asking somebody to get the same type of service that someone else could get in rapid time, that they were going to have to build it into their lives for almost whole day experiences.
Okay. This is great, guys. I noticed that we're heading towards our half-hour limit. So I think what we'll do is call this part 1 or episode 1, and we'll debrief, okay? Get something to drink and talk a little, and then we'll resume this conversation in part 2.
Thank you so much.
Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, so
Adios.
see you around. Take care of yourself and take care of others as needs be.
Be kind.
Bye.